Welcome back. Alarm in the Middle East as Turkish ground troops are continuing their advance against Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. U.S. President Donald Trump pulled American troops back from the area this week, paving the way for Turkey's assault on Syrian Kurdish forces allied with the U.S. Turkey says it intends to create a safe zone that would push Kurdish militia away from its border and eventually allow the repatriation of up to 2 million Syrian refugees. Well, Turkey's military campaign has drawn immediate criticism and calls for restraint from Europe and in Israel, concern over the future of American involvement in the region. Here's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
We do not aspire to be a people dwelling apart. But this is how we found ourselves on the eve of the Yom Kippur War, when only toward its end did we receive American assistance. Just like in 1973, also today, we greatly appreciate the highly important support of the United States, support that has greatly increased in recent years, and also the immense financial pressure the U.S. places on Iran. And yet, we will always remember and implement the basic rule that guides us. Israel will defend itself, by itself, against any threat.
Well, President Trump has since clarified in a statement that the U.S. does not endorse the Turkish attack and has made it clear to Turkey that this operation is, quote, a bad idea. But the decision marked a major shift in U.S. policy and drew opposition from all sides in Washington. World powers fear the action could open a new chapter in Syria's war and worsen regional turmoil. The president doubled down when asked about ISIS fighters escaping Syria. Take a listen.
Well, they're going to be escaping to Europe. That's where they want to go. They want to go back to their homes, but Europe didn't want them from us. We could have given it to them. They could have had trials. They could have done whatever they wanted. But as usual, it's not reciprocal.
I'm joined now in studio by our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, and in D.C. by Matthew Brodsky, a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group and Middle East and geopolitical analyst. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with me this hour. Matthew, I want to begin with you. Perhaps you can help us make some sense out of the Trump policy in this case, opposition in Washington to the move to pull out American troops from Syria. It seems on both sides of the aisle, and it doesn't seem to do much except maybe help Erdogan's political and regional ambitions. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I'm not supportive of this move. I think it's incredibly bad for America's long-term strategic interests. The rationale, however, that Trump is using is that he wanted to end wars. He uses this empty straw man rhetoric, which is a straw man war, that this is endless wars. Now, what the U.S. had is 1,200 troops there on the ground. Just one, incidentally, with an American uniform would have prevented this type of Turkish incursion. The U.S. was actually able to have the Kurdish allies fight this war against ISIS on our behalf while we provided mostly air cover and training and equip programs. So the U.S. was able to do a lot with a little. That should have been what President Trump was selling. Instead, since President Trump was unable to bring home the 14,000 troops that the U.S. has in Afghanistan, and he presented to his base that he would pull the U.S. out of endless wars, he's trying to do a sleight of hand here and get the U.S. out of Syria, except he's not even taking the U.S. out of Syria. He's just allowing Turkey to come in and essentially engage in ethnic cleansing. And if he wanted, incidentally, to prevent any of this, the time to have done that would have been during the phone call with President Erdogan. Clearly from the statement that the White House released right afterwards, none of that aspect was discussed. It's only now coming out, and there's still no red line that the president has declared as to what he considers acceptable.
Matthew, on the issue of ISIS, of course, the president had said before ISIS has been defeated in Syria, but now the concern is rising that maybe with the Turkish operation, ISIS fighters could find their way to Europe. The president himself said it might happen. Do you also believe that Turkey's operation in northern Syria might maybe revitalize the ISIS terror group?
Absolutely. Turkey is the major transit point for people coming to join ISIS in previous years. And of course, Erdogan's government, of course, and his people have traded with both ISIS and Iran at the same time. So it will lead to a resurgence in ISIS. And Erdogan himself apparently warned European nations who were just issuing a warning, not actually taking action, that he would allow this flood of refugees and others into Europe if Europe didn't stop its warning. So that is, of course, something that'll happen. But the other part that'll happen, of course, is that it could reopen, likely, the second of 3 main overland routes that Iran uses to get to Lebanon and the sea. Previously, that border area was controlled by the Kurds. That means Israel now is going to have to contemplate whether it's going to strike areas that are under Turkish control when it wants to strike at Iranian military equipment and offensive missiles that it's bringing into the region. That's an entirely different calculation that Israel has to make, and just another one of these side effects here.
Matthew, stay with us. I want to bring in on that point our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev. And Jonathan, as Matthew began to say, for Israel, it seems many reasons to be concerned. The Turkish forces moving in northern Syria, possibly shifting the situation there, ISIS fighters possibly escaping Syria, and American involvement not so hot right now in the region. It seems that the growing list of concerns for Israel just got another item on.
First and foremost, Israel for the past 2.5 years or so under the Trump administration and under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel always seemed to be secure in the fact that if anything happens, Israel has America on its back. I'm quite sure the Kurds thought the same. They support America in their fight against ISIS. If something ever happens, the United States would back them. Is the United States backing them? We're seeing that not. Therefore, Israel should also make its own calculations and perhaps understanding that even with a very strong and good and strategic relations with the United States, in case something happens, Israel might have to fight on its own. That is one thing. Second thing, we now understand that the United States, again, the strategic partner of Israel, is not the one calling the shots in Syria at all. Syria is given as a prize or divided or you name it by Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and that's a situation that is uncomfortable for Israel. Yes, there's strong cooperation between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Putin of Russia, but at the end of the day, Putin does what is good for Russia, and that may sometimes clash with the Israeli interests. We're seeing that when it comes to Syria, Russia does what it does, what's good for Russia. Is that always good for Israel? Absolutely not.
Jonathan, of course, this is not the first time Israel is looking at American reaction or lack of reaction and is concerned. That, of course, happened after the Iranian attack on Saudi oil facilities, which saw no retaliation that we can see.
No retaliation, and that again makes the equation that the United States does not want to get involved in the Middle East. Let's go back even further. The Iranians took down an American drone, which the United States still months later insists was flying in international waters. It took that drone down. Was there any response? No. Therefore, the Iranians, I think they understand that unless they do something massive, the United States will not react. Clearly not when the American elections are now a year away. The people voting in those elections, they're in Iowa, in Texas, or in Wyoming. They're not in the Middle East. Therefore, it's the internal problems that they worry about much more. And would they want to see now millions or billions of American dollars being spent away from home? Probably not. The Iranians know that. Here in Israel, people know that. Everybody knows that. Therefore, it is clear, I think, that unless something very big happens, the United States will stay away, and that means that Israel will have to deal with whatever happens on its own. Again, we're not speaking of a major war, but some tackles here, some clashes here, some incidents here and there, and that is something that might happen, just like the case of the Saudi oil fields that were attacked about a month ago.
And Matthew, one could argue, it would seem, that this is all part of Trump's campaign promises to minimize the American footprint in the Middle East and around the world. And here he is doing what he always said would do, even during on the campaign trail, bringing American troops home.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's making the wrong case for the wrong policy. The right case to make for this policy, which, again, I don't agree with, is that he doesn't like the fact that Turkey, Iran, and Russia are so closely in bed together. It's an unnatural marriage, and we want to hasten the time at which they're going to have a giant divorce. This giving this area to Turkey hastens that conflict between the three of them, and then that, of course, will lead to that divorce that benefits the U.S. That's not the case he's making. He's using the endless war case. No one understands this point better than Israelis. They don't want war. They're aware of what the endless war issue is, but the enemies, they want war. They have a vote in this matter as well. America's enemies do as well. So they're going to keep fighting the U.S. just like they're going to keep fighting Israel. And the U.S. and Israel separately or together can either respond or not respond. So by choosing not to respond, he's making the wrong case. He should be saying instead that what we're doing is so intelligent with just 1,200 troops. We've completely gathered a ton of leverage to use with Iran, with Russia, with Turkey, with all other sources when it comes to the future of Syria. And we did that on the cheap with our allies doing it. We used the Kurds precisely because we ourselves didn't want to be involved in an endless war. He should be selling that.
Gentlemen, before I let you go, I just want to mention an update. A NATO member, Norway, apparently now banning arms exports to Turkey. Of course, Turkey in itself a NATO member. Maybe we're seeing allies in NATO responding to Turkey's move in northern Syria. These are still live images on the Turkish-Syrian border you're seeing there. Matthew Brodsky in D.C. and Jonathan Regev here with me in studio. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me for this. Now to Israeli politics.